My name is Ernie Humphrey. I'm the Vice President of Educational Programs at Performative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. First, I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar today, Analytics-Based Enterprise Performance Management, Making It Work. Despite recent advances in cloud computing and related technologies, many organizations are still far from where they want and need to be in terms of driving performance. Companies still often apply intuition rather than hard data when making strategic and operational decisions. There is much talk about how to leverage analytics to drive performance, but how is it actually done? This webinar features renowned enterprise performance management expert Gary Cokins. Gary will discuss how companies are utilizing business analytics with an emphasis on predictive analytics and proactive decision-making with their EPM methods to become a competitive advantage differentiator. The content will also feature a case study from TMG Health, a company that is currently on the path to leveraging business analytics to drive performance across the enterprise, and this will be delivered by Jill Haas, who is helping lead them on this journey. I would like to thank Profix, whose commitment to thought leadership helps us make this event possible and delivered at no cost, like everything we do at Performative. A quick note on today's agenda. First, we'll hear presentations from our featured speakers, Gary Cokins and Jill Haas. Then we'll move into our interactive Q&A session, where we'll spend the remainder of our hour. We would like this to be an interactive experience for you. So if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get all of them in, but we'll do our best and follow up afterwards with any questions we did not get to during the webinar today. A few more logistical notes about the webinar. A link to today's presentation is already available on performative.com. We will also be posting the webinar recording as well in the next few days. Those who would like CPE credits through NASBA will need to answer all the polling questions during the event and should have pre-registered for CPE credit on the way into the registration process. For any questions on CPE credits, please contact Chris Brower at cbrower@performative.com. We'll have Chris's contact information up again later in our presentation today. Finally, you'll be asked to take a short survey today regarding the webinar. We greatly appreciate your feedback regarding our event today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. A quick word about Performative. Performative is the largest and fastest growing online community and resource for senior level corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. Performative connects corporate finance leaders to provide instant advice and insights on the tough financial and strategic challenges they face every day. Okay, let's get started by introducing today's first speaker, Gary Cokins, CEO, Analytics-Based Performance Management, LLC. Gary is an internationally recognized expert speaker and author in performance improvement systems and advanced cost management. While with KPMG working with Dr. David Norton, he was involved with the initial research that led to the development of the Balanced Scorecard. Previously, Gary headed the National Cost Management Consulting Services for EDS and served as a principal consultant at SAS, a leading provider of enterprise performance management and business analytics software. Gary has authored several acclaimed books, including Activity-Based Cost Management, Making It Work, which was judged by Harvard Business Press as the read this book first. Gary's latest books are Performance Management, Integrating Strategy Execution, Methodologies, Risk, and Analytics, and Strategic Business Management from Planning to Performance. He's participated on several committees, including CAMI, the Supply Chain Council, the International Federation of Accountants, Institute of Management Accountants, the AICPA, the AAA. Gary has received a BS with honors in Industrial Engineering Operations Research from Cornell University. He received his MBA with honors from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management in 1974. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Gary Cokins. Gary, take it away.
Thanks, Ernie. Okay, there's my photo so the audience can see what I look like. Who will benefit from this presentation? Managers who have previously struggled at promoting financial planning and analysis, enterprise performance management, and integrating business analytics into their decision support systems. Managers who intend to champion any and all enterprise performance management and business analytic improvement techniques and need a compelling call to action. And the reason I put champion in quotes is it's been my observation that although it's really good to have senior executive sponsorship for improvement initiatives, just too often they may be preoccupied with firefighting or office politics at the top. And it's actually been middle managers that I have found who really have sort of that passion, that fire in the belly to basically move their organization ahead. This is oftentimes who I really like to appeal to. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to try to clarify what enterprise performance management is. There's a lot of confusion and lack of consensus about it. I will similarly try to cover some of the confusion about what business analytics is. Then I'm going to describe what I consider to be the pressures that have caused the interest in performance management, and then I'll conclude with it as a value multiplier. So let's start with the first topic. Confusion and lack of consensus about enterprise performance management. Is it human resources? Actually, if you Google performance management, 90% of the hits will be HR, personnel, employee appraisal. But that's really about performance management of the individual. We're talking about of the organization as a whole. Is it scorecards, dashboards, KPIs, measures? Yes, but that's really just a subset. That's kind of the scorecard strategy map area, as well as the alignment of resources with allocations, of which Jill will touch on what they're doing in terms of budgeting. Is it about process, productivity, and quality improvement? Yes, but that's business process management, a subset. That's that area of lean management at Six Sigma. Quite frankly, it's a big umbrella. A lot of it all fits under that umbrella. The good news is this. Enterprise performance management is not a new methodology that everyone now has to learn, but rather it is the integration of existing methodologies that people are already familiar with, have read about, or maybe their organization has actually been implementing them. The problem is most organizations implement these methods and systems in isolation of each other or in a sequence, and you get a lot more synergy when you integrate them, and even more power when you embed in each methodology business analytics of all flavors like regression, segmentation, cluster analysis, and the like. So I provided that definition. I'll repeat it. Analytics-based performance management is the integration of multiple methodologies, and there's many of them, with each one embedded with business analytics, such as segmentation analysis, but especially predictive analytics, because my observation is most executives are moving away from sort of a command and control after the fact approach to much more anticipatory planning, where the volume and mix things are coming at them, and they're making adjustments in headcount or spend or solving small problems before they become big ones. The key is, the real purpose is to achieve strategy execution and make better decisions. So, business analytics. I always like this quote from Jeannie Harris, who co-authored the Competing on Analytics book with Tom Davenport. 40% of important decisions are not based on facts, but rather on intuition, experience, and anecdotal evidence. I always like to say to an organization, do we know or do we think we know? How do we validate? So there's a lot of confusion about the definitions, and there's many definitions for business analytics. My simple approach is work backwards with the end in mind. Regardless how analytics should be defined, there should be no argument as to its purpose, which are these two things: better decisions and better actions based on those decisions. So analytics' goal should be to gain insights and solve problems, to make better and quicker decisions with more accurate and fact-based data, and take actions. Now, there's also confusion between business intelligence and analytics and enterprise performance management. This is the way I basically disclose it. Business intelligence reporting consumes stored information, often in a data warehouse. In contrast, analytics produces new information from the stored information. So things like queries can answer questions, which can lead to even better questions. And then, of course, ultimately, analytics can help solve those questions. What enterprise performance management does, which is really a set of methodologies, is they deploy the analytics in the context of different missions. I always like to say it's not about monitoring the dials on a dashboard, but rather moving the dials, those actions and decisions. Now, business intelligence can be considered kind of using a Darwinian approach here, as these 4 steps: standard reports, ad hoc reports. In some cases, CIO will give some managers and employees query and drill down capability. You may have alerts, upper, lower limits. But what analytics does is it basically continues with the journey to statistical analysis, then, of course, moving to the predictive view, forecasting. That would be more like for operations, inventory management, and the like. Then predictive modeling, which is much more in the marketing space, analyzing, what type of customer would react to what type of offer or deal. And then, of course, Mount Everest, the top of the hill, optimization, which is expensive, but it's a goal for people to aspire to. I love this cartoon It's got this clerk in a desk with cluttered all around, shoulders hunched, sort of frowning, supervisor at the left in the doorway asking the clerk, looks like you've got all the data. What is the holdup? I gave you the request this morning. What's the problem? Why don't you have the answer? And that's what most organizations are struggling with, this whole area or topic of big data. So enterprise performance management, as I've mentioned, has really been around for decades, arguably even before computers. So why is there interest in it now? And what I'd like to quickly walk through is what I consider to be 8 forces, of which I'm going to cover several of them during the rest of the talk. The first one is executives' frustration with strategy failure. Most executive teams are quite good at formulating strategy, or they'll bring in McKinsey or Booz Allen, one of these classic strategy consulting firms. Their big frustration is failure to execute the strategy, and there's a fair amount of evidence, just the high turnover rate of CEOs. Second force, increase accountability. Accountability is on the rise for everyone, and it's not going to be avoidable. It's going to even be accountability with consequences. Individuals' promotions or jobs may even be at risk. Third force, more rapid decision making. Unlike, I think, 5 or 10 years ago, you could test and learn and have meetings in conference rooms. Today, you may be on the phone and it's a go or no-go decision. Fourth force, mistrust of the managerial accounting system for accuracy and transparency. And when I get to that section, I will talk about methodologies like activity-based costing. Fifth area, poor customer value management. Organizations are shifting from being product-centric to being more customer-centric, but they're not all doing a good job on serving customers. Sixth item is the item which Jill will talk about when she follows me at the end of my part, is contentious budgeting. Poor resource capacity planning, which is really what a budget is, and I'm going to say it now, I think the budgeting process is broken. It's a disaster. I think if you ask most operational managers, raise their hand, how many of you love doing the annual budgeting process? Virtually none of them will raise their hand, so we will talk about what this is all about, and Jill will then give examples from her company. Seventh force, which I won't go into detail, is just supply chain management. It's dysfunctional, and too much adversarial relationships between suppliers and buyers. They really need to basically operate as if they are a single chain. And the last force is what I call unfulfilled return on investment promises from large IT systems. So I'm not being critical of ERP, enterprise resource planning, or customer relationship management systems, but I think if you ask most CIOs, how well do you believe the promise of an ROI from your software vendor met its expectations, they'll be frustrated. The problem is not that those aren't good systems. They're absolutely excellent for putting it in. It's just that we need to basically get the ROI out of the information that's in them. So let's talk about 4 of the 8 forces, and I'll start with this strategy. Failure by executives to execute their well-formulated strategy. Typically, what solves this is a coupling together of what's called the balanced scorecard and strategy maps that go with it. But of course, above that is really the vision and mission statement. That must come from the executives. That's their job. That's what they're responsible for. The executives, in my mind, are supposed to answer this one question: where do we want to go? But what enterprise performance management and all of the managers and operational people below it really answer the second question: how will we get there? And that's the role of strategy maps and scorecards. Strategy map and the scorecard, they're mechanical. They're like gears in a machine. All these methods are like gears in machines, but most people have broken gears or gears that are separated and just have a vision of highly toned platinum gears that are spinning at faster revolutions per minute. Now, this is clearly not a workshop training session, but just a quick view of a kind of a simplistic strategy map. There tends to be 4 perspectives that start at the bottom: learning and growth. That's the soft part of employees, and if they're accomplishing the objectives that are in those boxes, they'll contribute to accomplishing the internal process improvement objectives, and if they're accomplishing those, they'll contribute to the customer perspective. So this is like a force field in physics from bottom to top, where you're aligning the behavior and performance of employees to eventually accomplish those financial objectives, like increasing profits and shareholder wealth creation. To oversimplify it, what you have is a learning environment stimulates process excellence. Process excellence leads to customer intimacy, and the customer intimacy then creates the financial value. Oversimplify it, the way I view scorecards and strategy maps is imagine if every employee in your organization every day could answer this one question: how am I doing on what is important? The first half is actually fairly easy if employees actually have the view of their various dashboards. They can see are they favorable or unfavorable to a target. But the real power is in the last part of the question, on what is important. And that's the dilemma of selecting what are the appropriate key performance indicators, which would be a seminar in and of itself. So the strategy map and scorecards provide this answer. The overriding purpose of a strategy map and scorecard system is to make the mission and strategy everyone's job. Now, I mentioned that the seminars, this webinar is really about analytics embedded into the methodologies. And one of the techniques is inputting correlation analysis into the strategy map. So here you see a strategy map with the various arrows that are basically going from top to bottom. When you throw and embed correlation analysis with it, which is that button here, now what you get, and unfortunately there's some sort of technical difficulty, that thickness of these various orange arrows that you see here should be thicker or thinner. But what it means is, with the software embedded, is that the thickness of the arrow reflects the explanatory value that one KPI has on another KPI. This is quite powerful because this is a way to begin validating, have I selected the right KPIs? I may even have negative correlation, which means I've got interference, which if one department is doing too good on their performance, they may actually adversely affect another department in another area. So it's one example of analytics in performance management. Let's move on to management accounting. The fourth pressure was mistrust of the managerial accounting system and its flawed cost allocations and misleading cost reporting of outputs, products, standard service lines, channels, customers, and outcomes. And Chris, the key phrase there was cost allocations, because most managers believe it's not cost allocations, it's misallocations. They feel they're being adversely overcharged by needs that are caused by other departments. And that's what's led to the interest in activity-based costing. And I'm going to give you the quick, simple definition of what ABC is. Imagine you go to a restaurant with 3 other friends. You order a little salad. The other 3 order the most expensive item on the menu and a glass of wine. And when the waiter or waitress brings the bill, the other 3 say, hey, let's split this check evenly. How do you feel? You feel cheated. You feel it's not fair. Well, that is how also in most organizations' traditional standard cost accounting system, the products feel when the accountants take this large amount of indirect and shared expense, commonly called overhead, and allocate it on these broad brush averages like headcount, square feet, direct labor input hours. It just does not reflect the unique consumption that those individual products basically consume of the various business processes end-to-end and the work activities that belong into them. So the simple definition is it's as if the waiter or waitress brings 4 individual checks. You pay for what you consume. Now, the methodology of activity-based costing on the left is it starts with the general ledger expenses. It basically translates that same amount of money into the cost of the work activities, and then it reassigns them into the various cost objects, products, services, channels, and customers. Now on the right, it isn't quite that simple because you've got support departments that do work for other support departments and so forth. So it really winds up being a multi-stage cost assignment system, but there are commercial activity-based costing software packages that do this modeling. You can't do ABC in Excel too easily. You usually hit the wall. But what's much more important is what do you see after you've done the calculation, and this is the famous profit cliff. What it's showing on the vertical axis is the net revenues less the properly calculated using ABC costing, and it's rank order from left to right, the cumulative profit buildup. And the very last data point, that $2 million, will reconcile exactly with the P&L, which was $30 million and 28. It's always organizational shock because you can see that in this case there was $8 million of unrealized profit on 3/4 of the most profitable products, and then $6 million lost on the remainder to reconcile the two. And the problem is, if before using ABC, this graph looks like this little anthill with the hook on the end, and that's just because the broad average allocations without cause and effect relationships was suppressing all of the accuracy, and the ABC lifted it out. Now, next force, which is the shift from being product-centric to customer-centric. One can also go below the gross margin line. You don't just stop at product costing because you want to look at the channels and the customers as well. And here's a great cover of a book from a marketing department at Columbia University, Angel Customers and Demon Customers. And what that means is you've got some high maintenance customers that cause a lot of extra work, returning goods, shifting schedules, calling help desks, and then you've got the angel customers that don't do any of that stuff. And that can only be detected to get a customer P&L by using the activity-based costing methodology. And that can produce a profit clip like I showed you, or alternatively using a decile diagram. So in this case, you've got the top 10% rank ordered of customers, then the next 10% and so forth, and you can see typical example is it is a minority of customers basically are responsible for a substantial amount of profit. But now where do analytics come in? All that does, although it's a lot, is it answers who's more profitable and who's less profitable, but doesn't explain why. And so you can hypothesize, well, what factors contribute to the most profitable customers? You know, might it be old people or young people? Might it be those who live in, you know, high-income zip codes? And the analysts can basically hypothesize all of these to their heart's content. But a solution is just throw the computer at it. Now that you've got that independent variable of profitability, you can go to the customer files and look at all the other factors, and I'm going to throw a big, tough, strong word out here, which is called recursive partitioning with decision trees. I won't go through this slide in any detail, but the computer can then say, this is the number one factor that differentiates most profitable from least profitable customers, and here's the second most important factor or contributing factor, and so forth. I'm just using these as examples of analytics in the methodologies. The Chief Financial Officer must now help sales and marketing to better target customers. It's not just about operational cost reduction. Segmentation, predictability, churn, offers, deals, risk, and uncertainty must be understood in the language of money. Now let's go to the topic that Jill's going to cover after I'm done, the budgeting process. My belief is the budget is typically a fiscal exercise that's done by the accountants, that's disconnected from the executive team strategy, and it's not based on future volumes. You know, in fact, here's part of the problem. Most organizations, in fact, usually near the end of the year, you've got use it or lose it behavior because managers see that they haven't spent all of the budget they've been allotted, and so what do? They start spending furiously. That's because often the traditional budgeting technique is to take each cost center like the left side and then increment it by inflation or some amount. You know, formula equals column B times 1.05, 5% inflation, and copy down. Some of you should be laughing on your end. It's really ridiculous. You basically have to be far more sensitive. And so what I'm describing here in this next diagram is that the budget should really be the result of two big river streams that are coming at it. The recurring expenses that are repeatable, which are demand-driven, and then the project-driven expenses, which that are non-recurring. And I'm going to basically decompose this diagram and go into detail. For the recurring expenses that are repeatable, the technique to use once you have an ABC system in place, which is the left side, the spending is known, so you calculate the outputs. You use the calibrated consumption rates, all the cost per unit from the model, and then you predict and estimate, forecast the volume and mix that are coming out. You calculate backwards through those consumption rates to solve for the level of resources. That's the operational resource capacity management. Now, it does get tricky because, quite frankly, the descriptive view, the historical view, some would call it, you know, full absorption costing, is just really money that's already been spent. But when you go to the predictive view, you do need to classify the behavior of the resources relative to the changes as sunk, fixed, semi-variable, or variable. My background's industrial engineering. This comes natural to industrial engineers, but not to all accountants. Also, risk management is becoming part of the budget process. Risk managers basically use a diagram such as this. The vertical axis is the security of impact of a risk event, which are the circles. The horizontal axis is the probability of a risk event occurring. So if you're in the upper right, it means it's high impact and high likelihood of happening. One should be using risk mitigation spending. You can't cover all of them. Some of them, to the bottom left, you just cross your fingers and hope they don't happen. So to sort of summarize and then go into the detail of this, same diagram, you've got the repeatable expenses, the non-repeatable expenses. For performance-based budgeting, for the repeatable, use activity-based costing consumption rates, combined with forecasting, calculate backwards, solve for the capacity. For the non-recurring, you use the strategy map, which I talked about at the beginning, which identifies in those various strategic objectives what should be the projects and initiatives to accomplish the project, use the risk projects, and use the capital budget as well. I didn't touch on capital budget. We're all familiar with it. And to decompose this diagram, and I certainly am not going to go into detail, it will be in your slides, but if you look at the bottom right box, which says derived budget and rolling financial forecasts, what you see coming in there from the over right side is the operational budget. That's taking, if you will, the forecast of the volume of mix times the rates, coming up with the capacity resource plan, monetizing it in dollars to have your operational budget. On the left side, you start with your strategy map, which gives you the objectives. Then you fund the projects and initiatives. You do the capital budget. You do the risk mitigation budget. When all three of those come together, voila, that is a valid budget. It may not be attainable, may not be achievable, so you may have to go back and figure out what productivity improvement projects that we need to do in order to provide, to actually meet the achieved budget. Now, I mentioned about analytics being included in this as well. Most organizations typically have a single point budget, which is the left side. A few cases, the CFO or controller budget managers will ask managers, well, what would be a best case, the baseline, and a worst case method, and they'll do the calculation. Well, start thinking about which budget report would you desire. Why not have the 8, 10, or 15 key managers estimate not just the best and worst case, but give them a range of maybe 5 to 7 on, if you will, think of it, a mini bell-shaped curve. Have the computer combine all of them together and give you basically a bell-shaped distribution of the entire budget. And now rolling financial forecast. The budget tends to be obsolete in a couple of months anyway, so most organizations are moving towards quarterly or even monthly rolling forecast. If you have the automation, and many of the software vendors can provide that, you could refresh that model at periodic intervals. So let me start summarizing by, I think what's happening is the return on investment is really shifting from tangible assets like machines and equipment, trucks, servers, to intangible assets like information. And what this diagram is showing is the asymptotic curve, if you will, exponential, where the return on investment from information is increasing exponentially as you move from raw data to information to knowledge and intelligence. The problem is most organizations are stuck at the 2 red bubbles to the left, raw data and standard reports. In some cases, the CIO may provide some managers with drill-down capability through ad hoc reports, but they're still limited to only answer the question, what happened? When you move to the 3 bubbles to the left, the first one, now we move into the enterprise performance management methodologies, descriptive modeling with analytics. So in that first blue bubble, not only can we answer what happened, we can answer why did it happen. And we move to the 5th bubble, predictive analytics, with forecasts and estimating. Not only can we answer what happened, why did it happen, but what can happen. What are all the options, what if scenarios and the like. And then, of course, at the top is optimization, kind of the Mount Everest, of all of the choices we could have with our predictive scenarios, what is the best choice? Many organizations have ERP systems, and they're excellent for what they're designed to do. But I kind of look at computer software as like the brain. There's really 2 types. There's, in your body, you've got this reptilian brain stem, back of your neck controls breathing, blinking, digesting food. And then you've got the cerebral cortex, which is where you make your decisions. It's where you think. It's what distinguishes human beings from, reptiles, amphibians, and snakes. I see the ERP software as kind of the reptilian brainstem. You got to have it. That's the stuff to the left. but what performance management methodologies and analytics, including the budgeting techniques that Jill's going to explain in just a few minutes, really that brings you into that cerebral cortex so you can basically see things more clearly and make better decisions. And because I'm at my time limit, the next two slides are really not as critical. I'm going to basically hand it off to Jill or to Ernie to introduce her. But I'm just going to briefly say a frustration I have had is I think these technologies and tools are all proven. Why is the adoption rate so slow? And I will just tell you, technology is not the impediment. It is behavioral. It is cultural. It is resistance to change. It's fear of knowing the truth. It's not wanting to be held accountable. It's not wanting to be measured and the like, weak leadership. We've got to get going, if you will, to basically fully embrace the performance management methodologies. I'm clicking through this one quickly. And there's that last one, organizational behavior barriers, resistance to change. That's the big obstacle. The complete vision of performance management, I used a gear metaphor or analogy. Here's the titanium gears spinning faster, quicker, better, faster, cheaper, safer risk management, and smarter. So I will hand it back to Ernie.
Oh, thank you very much, Gary, for that great content and giving us such a succinct and very effective overview. I particularly like your slide around unifying EPM MBA. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and launch our first polling question, as I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Jill Haas. Please note that for those of you in today's audience who are after CPE credits today, you will need to answer all of our polling questions today. So again, Gary gave us a great overview on the theory side and got into some practices. And after we introduce Jill, what Jill's going to do is kind of take it from theory to practice, as she is on the front lines in introducing EPM at her company through the budgeting process. Jill Haas is a financial analyst at TMG Health. Jill joined the company almost 2 years ago in the finance department, working with the company's annual budgets. Jill has previous experience in financial and SEC reporting, as well as forecasting and analyzing budgets. She has a bachelor's degree in business administration and finance from St. Joseph's University. She has developed and implemented several financial models in her career to increase the efficiency in daily operations. And with that, it is going to be my distinct pleasure to hand the floor over to our next featured speaker, Jill Haas, Financial Analysis, TMG Health. Take it away, Jill.
Great. Thanks, Ernie, for the introduction. As Ernie mentioned, I'm a financial analyst at TMG Health. I'm going to speak a little about our budget process and breaking away from Excel and switching to a new, more efficient tool. Okay, just some background on TMG. TMG was founded in 1998, and we offer business processing outsourcing services to insurers, health plans, employers, and providers in mostly the Medicare Advantage, Medicare Part D, Medicaid Managed Care, and group retiree health plans. We have over 1,300 employees with annual revenues of over $90 million. So you can imagine how detailed our annual budgets are. We have about 22 health plans and serve over 2.2 million members all throughout the United States. That's just some background on TMG. Now let's switch gears and let me describe to you what our previous budget process was like so you can understand the painful situation we were in. Before switching to a CPM solution, we functioned only using Excel. There were several issues and reasons why this limited our capabilities. It made it extremely difficult to compare budget versus actual data to then be able to forecast for the following year. There was a disconnect from our accounting software, which made the process hard to manage. Also, about 65% of our expenses at TMG are all payroll expenses. And as I mentioned before, we have over 1,300 employees. It was a complete headache to calculate payroll taxes, 401k, and healthcare benefits for each employee. But clearly, we need to do that to budget correctly for the following year. We also had to compute merit and raise increases for the employees just by using formulas in Excel. It was extremely easy to make errors by calculating the changes. And often, employees will transfer from one department to another, so we would end up with 2 or 3 departments having the same employee in their budget. This step alone made the entire process long and convoluted. We have each department prepare their own budget and then consolidate them into one corporate budget. in order to integrate all the department's budgets into one and just using Excel as our tool made this an extremely manual project which left room for far too many errors. We also typically require several budget cuts from the departments before we finalize. By being limited to just Excel made this a very long and strenuous task to complete. Another item that makes our budget process a little more complicated is we usually have to create a supplemental budget to capture all new clients we were not aware of at the time of the original budget. So to combine the original with the supplemental budget in Excel was very frustrating. We were constantly double-checking formulas and links to make sure we were capturing all the data correctly. After many years of frustration and our company continuing to expand, we knew it was time to make a change. We knew it was time to implement a CPM solution. We had to move beyond Excel. We decided to hire outside consultants to help us with the process. They provided us with a few different software options that they thought was best for what we were looking for. We wanted to take our time and decide which option was best for TMG. We scheduled presentations so each company could share their product with us, and in the end, we decided on Profix for a couple different reasons. We felt it was very user-friendly and had much more potential than just using it for financial budgeting. We were able to link our accounting software directly into Profix, which would enable us and every user to be able to view actual data and compare it to the budget data. So once we decided we definitely wanted to implement Profix, it was time to get our team on board with the decision. Convincing our team to switch to the new software was fairly easy. They knew as much as we did that it was time to make a change. Once we presented our plan and how the software worked, they knew our department and budget process would be much more efficient. Implementation took about 2 to 3 weeks. The first week was on-site and the second was remote. There were a couple days for follow-up. There were a few hiccups along the way, but overall the whole process went smooth. We were provided support and training over the entire time. Once it was fully implemented, everyone was very excited and eager to learn the software. We felt like we were finally above water and ready to begin our new budget process. We held internal trainings throughout the company. We created written step-by-step instructions, which we provided to each user. And now it's time to immediately jump into budget season. We got positive feedback from the users, and they were relieved how much quicker it was for them to prepare their budget. We saw results in the accuracy of information as Profix pulled in the GL data from our accounting software. We were able to make budget cuts across all departments using a feature in Profix. And since the departments were able to view their actual data, it allowed them to be much more prepared and forecast their expenses in a much more detailed and accurate manner. All changes can be made on the fly and reviewed instantly. Lastly, we were finally able to combine our supplemental with our original budget. Needless to say, we were thrilled with the results. The entire budget process was much more efficient and less labor-intensive. We've had Profix for a couple years now, and we look forward to the next steps using the software. We tend to take one project at a time. We've already started to look beyond the budgeting process. We have created all our financial reports in Profix, examples being the P&L, the balance sheet, cash flows, and statement of equity. And starting in 2013, all our reporting will come straight from Profix and will be automatically generated to senior executives. We've come a long way. We are able to view all the GL data, which saves the accounting department a significant amount of time as they are not fielding as many questions as they had in the past. And our next project for this year is to prepare our 2014 capital budget and link the actual data in the software. This will enable us to compare both operating and capital budgets at the same time. We're very much looking forward to the next step and projects beyond this one. Now, we've learned a few lessons over the course of integrating the new software. One, the less labor-intensive and the more automated the process is, the better. Two, don't be scared of change, embrace it. Three, compare and analyze what is best for your company and decide what the future holds. Lastly, ask yourself, how can I use my CPM solution today? And that does it. Thanks, everyone, for your time and listening to my story. I'll now hand it back over to Ernie.
Oh, Dan, thank you very much. Jill. At this point, we're going to launch our final 2 polling questions as we begin our Q&A session to be sure that we take full advantage of the opportunity to tap into Gary and Jill's knowledge. Just as a reminder, if you have a question and would like to have answered by Jill or Gary, please ask it via the questions area in your go-to webinar control panel. Well, we've got 2 more polling questions that we need to go through, and we appreciate everyone's response to the polling questions. We'll leave those up for like a minute apiece on the polling questions. I would like to direct my first question to Jill. You mentioned that the implementation time took 2 to 3 weeks. Were you surprised by that? Just curious how that was able to be done in such a short time period.
Yeah, I was surprised that it wasn't going to take longer than that. But like I said, we take 1 project at a time. We weren't going to implement, you know, more uses. We were just focusing on doing the operating budget first. So, you know, that was the time it took. And there were definitely a couple days for follow-ups and, you know, just learning the software, you know, more extra days to learn and have them train us. But it really wasn't that bad. Definitely worth it in the end.
Okay, great. Gary, next question is going to be coming your way. In terms, you know, of your experience, you know, all the great theory that you laid out for us can be pretty daunting. Can you give us some insights as to someone who is on the far left end of the adoption curve, where you've seen might be the best place to start in kind of building that EPM strategy from the ground up?
Well, because middle of my career, 15 years, was consulting with Deloitte and KPMG and EDS. Consultants have learned there's always one answer to every question, which is it depends. Your question is really, how do I get started? And the reason I say it depends is that it really means, you know, what are your what's kind of the burning platform priority? If strategy execution is the frustration of the executives, then you know, I would move towards the performance measurements, KPIs and PIs, and that's a whole sort of separate area because people get dashboards confused with scorecards and they're sort of integrated. But if there is really question about transparency, lack of visibility of the output costs, because that's what activity-based costing does. It doesn't only more accurately calculate, but it lets you see the content of the work, you know, then, you know, I would start, you know, with activity-based costing. Probably backing up is just education. You know, there's so many now, books or articles or documents. For example, the Institute of Management Accountants in the U.S. has Statements of Management Accounting. CMA Canada has similar ones. CIMA, which is the European Management Accounting, you know, has others. There's also many balanced scorecard strategy map, you know, websites, you know, to use. So I mean, obviously, education is really the key at the, you know, at the front end. Once the journey begins, the key to me is having that vision, because there's really 3 questions: what, so what, and then what. And you first want to at least accomplish answering that first question. Where do we make money? Where do we lose money? What should we be measuring? The so what is where the analytics come in. You know, what does it mean to us? What insights can we gain, and so forth. The then what is really the key, and I believe that's what Jill's organization has, you know, coming forward, which is, okay, what will be the impact of our decisions? When we make changes, what will be the consequences? Where will we make more or less money? So that's the kind of a journey from beginning to end.
Great, thanks. Jill, I've got a question for you. Were you able to implement your changes for the 2013 budget season, part 1, and then on the back side of that, you mentioned that the implementation was pretty smooth on your side. So how was that implementation so easy? Were the interfaces similar to what people were used to seeing, and how was there not a lot of user shock on what you were asking them to do and change their processes?
Well, the first part of your question, we did do the 2013 budget and profits, and like I said, we've had profits for a few years now. But back to when we first implemented it, I think the users were so frustrated with how long it took to prepare their budget in Excel and how many different moving parts there were that they were open to learn the new software and learn what it was capable of, and realize, the following year when they prepared their budget, it would look a lot more familiar to them, and they were okay with the learning curve. They understood. So we did have all positive feedback, and it is very user-friendly, I will say. It almost looks like Excel, but a lot more features in it.
Okay, great. Again, if you have any questions, please ask those in the questions area in your GoToMeeting control panel. I think we're going to take a few moments here and look into some of the survey results, as some of those are fairly interesting. So the first polling question that we asked our audience was around how does your company currently manage data for analytics, and it looks like the vast majority of those folks are dump ERP into Excel. I guess I would ask Gary, is this surprising to you? And then do you think that this is going to be a trend that goes downward? Is that 45 smaller or larger? And then as people go from Excel, where do you think that first step is going to be for most people?
Well, clearly Excel and spreadsheets is the tool of choice, and there are some low-level analytics capabilities, in Excel, but I think almost everyone who reads magazines and sees, website messages and blogs and so forth, the message about big data, which is growing phenomenally large, including unstructured data, which is not, quantitative data, but is, text and emails, is so big data and business analytics is just, the buzzwords, and I don't think it's going to stop. It's not going to stop. It's just going to continue to grow. So, organizations will begin to move stepwise up towards a whole range of analytics tools that are more powerful than Excel. It's like anything. Everything is stages of maturity and stages of evolution, and analytics is here to stay.
Okay, great. Before we look at our next polling question, I'm going to go ahead and ask Jill a question here. When you implement the capital budgeting, do you intend to collect proposals for capital projects through the system that would then get decided on senior management?
Yes, that's exactly. It will kind of be exactly like how we do our operating budgets. Is each department will have ownership of their capital budget and prepare it, and then the finance department and senior management will go through it and make cuts if they need to, and then eventually approve it along with the operating budget, and it will be so much easier to look at the operating and capital budgets all in one system and be able to really see what we're spending our money on.
Okay, great. Kind of a related article on the technology front. I'm just sharing the results from our second question. Again, it just looks like people are still in the Excel world. Gary, can I get you to comment on as we move away from Excel? I think that there are some inherent risks in using Excel in that financial planning process. Can you comment on the some of the biggest risks that are mitigated when people make that transition?
Well, I think just competency in analytics, that's one of the big sort of concerns that are written by the analytics gurus, people like James Taylor. I encourage people to read some of the blogs, and that's not James Taylor the singer, it's James Taylor. I believe his organization is Decision Management Solutions. And then there's others. Wayne Eckerson, who is the R&D manager for the TDWI, the data warehouse. I'm not sure what the I stands for. That there's just not going to be enough skilled talent yet, to apply the analytics. So that's, if you won't consider it a risk. The other potential risk is maybe spending too much effort on analyzing history, what happened, And it's sort of shown, I think, which is telling in this, this polling question, which is really the movement towards the forecasting, the predictive view. Because, quite frankly, the more that you can basically be more accurate with your predictions, your forecasting, it reduces uncertainty. And when you reduce uncertainty, you know, basically you have more trust in your decision making. And when you can refresh forecasts at more frequent intervals, then you're constantly basically kind of like navigating, you know, you're going to constantly be, you know, improving your decisions. The predictive analytics is going to be, you know, a big space. But, you know, people are going to have capabilities. They're going to have access to the data. Oh, another risk is clearly going to be, and I'm not that technical of a guy, which is the quality of the data management. You know, if the source data basically is impure or there's problems, you know, there'll be issues there. I thought Jill did a nice job describing how TMG was able to successfully basically export the general ledger data into the Profix software. Didn't seem without much of a hitch, but if there had been quality problems there, that would have been a risk.
Okay, great. Jill, can I get you to just, you know, comment? Obviously, you know, going from Excel, you know, to the new technology offered some benefits. Can you give us a sense of how much time was saved in terms of, you know, maybe version controls, Excel sheets, you know, going back and forth, and then maybe speak to maybe some of the benefits of having one version of the truth? Was this a more collaborative process in making that upgrade?
Sure. Like I said, each department owns their own budget, and then we consolidate it and make budget cuts as we need to. So to combine all that was almost impossible to do in Excel. You never knew if you were capturing every row and every column. So it was just really hard to know if we're capturing all the data we should be. So to be able to take it into a solution like Profix, where there were you know, checks for us to make sure we were capturing, there was no way that we weren't capturing all the information. And to do even like a simple 10% budget cut, you can do that at a drop of a hat, whereas in Excel, you know, you'd have to at least give each department maybe a week to complete it, where here we can just do it, and it literally takes 5 minutes. So the time, you can't even compare the two because we've saved so much time.
Great. And then your question really leads into the last, you know, polling question, which is to give us a sense of the collaboration between finance and operations in the company's budgeting and planning efforts. As you've moved towards this upgrade, have you found the level of collaboration and the cooperation has increased on your side as they've been more engaged? Maybe the process is a little bit easier, and now the operations people maybe feel they have increased visibility. Have you noticed that collaboration going towards a positive side with this upgrade?
Yes, I have. I mean, they're much more involved in the budgets because they can be. It doesn't take them as much time, and you know, we're more involved. So yeah, they definitely have been more involved.
Okay, just maybe a comment, you know, for Gary as you've been through this process. You know, can you give us maybe some insights on how to build that collaboration between finance and operations and increase that ownership and that accountability that you talked about a little bit?
Well, one clear thing that I'm observing, and of course it's talked about all the time, is that the role of the chief financial officer function, whether it's controllers, management accountants, budget managers, what have you, you know, is moving to much more of a strategic partner, you know, at the executive level, boardroom level. You know, the phrase I like to use is from bean counter to bean grower. And I think the jury's out. A question I often ask people is, will the influence and power of the CFO finance organization relative to the other line functions like operations, marketing, sales, engineering, if it was a manufacturing company, will that power and influence of the CFO function, will it stay the same, will it diminish, or will it grow? And you get this very interesting question to, you know, there's a cocktail question, cocktail hour question. The general answer I get, but maybe it's biased because I'm talking to finance people, is they do believe that their influence is going to grow. They're spending much less time on transactional processing because of automation, payroll, accounts payable, purchasing systems, and the like, which is freeing up time to basically be more analytical. The important thing is this collaboration. Will they be able to understand the non-financial stuff that's going on in the other typical silos with an organization? But one nice thing about, I think, finance and accounting people, their brains are kind of wired, maybe it's DNA from birth, to be analytical, to be quantitative, and we are moving towards more of a fact-based world rather than that intuition. It's just things are just way too complex, I think, for managers to basically use gut feel and intuition, as was sort of described in that Jeannie Harris quote.
Okay, great. I've got maybe sort of a follow-up question, and for you, Gary. One of the other things that you discussed was just the ability to gather all these types of data. So these companies are gathering data from all over the spectrum, and also including sales and marketing data. Do you have any kind of rules or advice or practical advice for people to be on sort of a data diet? So how to focus or how to have procedures to identify which of that data is important, so they're not lost in that amount of data per that cartoon?
I'm a real big believer in, and maybe I should have mentioned this when you said how to get started, in using what's called rapid prototyping with iterative remodeling approaches. Rather than having this long 9-month project where in the IT space they would call it data requirements definition. It's oftentimes the IT organization, all these big binders of data definitions and identification, so forth, which is sort of what I call start small, think big. Do like activity-based costing. The approved way of implementing is build the first model with 4 or 5 people in a room for 2 days, and don't worry about the accuracy. Don't even expect it to be accurate. Just get familiar with how you reassign these costs, and then do it again a little deeper, a little more disaggregation, and sort of slowly move up the curve, getting a little more accuracy, because you get diminishing returns on extra accuracy for the extra level of effort. Same thing with strategy maps and scorecards. Just build one really fast, and don't expect to use it, but just kind of get the idea for it. And so by doing that, the data that's going to be required for the decisions and the like starts basically self-defining itself. In the IT world, they call it RAD, Rapid Application Development, which is really in contrast to a more laborious, rigorous, trying to define all this stuff in advance and build the big system for 9 months and then unveil this thing like a piece of artwork. And usually when you do that, most of the learning didn't take place, and it's going to eyes glaze over, and people get confused, and sometimes they then just reject the system. Oh, it doesn't work. It's too complicated.
Okay, great. Let's be mindful of our time. We're just going to have one more question in the Q&A. Then we'll close the Q&A session. This question is for Jill. We have someone in the audience who is looking to evaluate several vendors as a CPM solution. What tips might you have for those folks kind of in the marketplace there, based on your experience?
Based on my experience, I would say to make sure that they give you presentations and you can really get a hands-on approach to how the software would work. And it would be very important for it to be user-friendly. I'd also would like to look at and make sure there's other options to do with the software other than what you're looking to do right now, because things may change in 2 years and you may want to implement another solution but want to implement it in the same software you already currently use. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, great. With that, I'd like to close the Q&A session. I'd like to thank Gary and Jill for their time and valuable insights. If you would like us to connect you with either of those directly, please indicate that on the survey we'll ask you to take immediately at the conclusion of their webinar. They're both clearly thought leaders and an excellent source for today's information. Again, we appreciate your consideration in taking the survey, as we're always doing our best to improve the ROI for all of our events. Thanks again to today's sponsor, Profix. Their commitment to thought leadership is crucial to the value that we offer Performative. Again, for CPE credits, if you have any questions on the CPE front, please email Chris Brower at cbrower.com in order to receive your CPE credits. I'd also like to take just a moment to let the audience know that we are having a full-day conference on how to leverage technology across the enterprise, of which EPM will be a key component. At Performatech, a full-day conference on how to leverage technology to drive results across the enterprise. And of course, like everything else, the conference is free. We'd love to see you there. Finally, I'd like to thank the audience for your valuable time, and I hope to see each of you on performative.com and at future performative events. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.